Evelyn Harper did not scream. She did not weep. She set her coffee cup down on the breakfast table with the gentleness of a woman who had already decided everything, rose from her chair, smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, and curtsied, low, composed, and final, before the man who had just told a room full of people that he married her because no better woman would have him. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to love you, stay with this story until the very end. Comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1816 arrived in Virginia the way it always did, hot and indifferent, pressing down on the red clay roads and the wide tobacco fields with equal weight, caring nothing for the people moving beneath it. And inside the Whitmore estate, breakfast was served at precisely 8 o'clock, the way it had been served every morning for 40 years. Evelyn Harper. Whitmore sat at the far end of the long mahogany table and did not look at her husband. This was not unusual. In 2 years of marriage, she had learned to find safe places to rest her eyes: the silver pitcher near the window, the embroidered edge of the tablecloth, the pattern on her own porcelain cup. Places that did not carry opinions. Places that did not measure her. She was 26 years old. She had brown hair that was too ordinary to be called chestnut and too dark to be called golden. Her face was pleasant enough, she knew that, but pleasantness was not the word men used when they spoke of the women they admired. She had heard herself described when people thought she was not listening as sensible, reliable, a decent sort of woman. No one ever called her beautiful. She had made her peace with that long before Nathaniel Whitmore proposed. At the other end of the table, Nathaniel sat with the particular posture of a man accustomed to every room arranging itself around him. He was 34, broad-shouldered in the way that old Virginia families seemed to produce naturally, as though the land itself demanded a certain physical authority from the men who owned it. His face was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and controlled expression, and his dark eyes moved across his correspondence with the same efficient calm he brought to everything. He had not looked at Evelyn yet this morning. He rarely did at breakfast. His mother sat between them. Margaret Whitmore, 61 years old, and in perfect health, which Evelyn had once overheard a neighboring woman describe as a punishment from God on the Whitmore household. Margaret wore black, as she had every day since her husband died 7 years ago, though. Everyone in the county understood the black had less to do with grief and more to do with an aesthetic preference for severity. Margaret was watching Evelyn's hands. She often did this, tracked the movement of Evelyn's hands across the table, cataloging small violations of propriety that she would present later in the day privately, with the measured tone of a schoolteacher who has already lost all patience. This morning, Evelyn was reaching for the bread basket. "The Caldwells are coming on Thursday," Margaret said. Her voice had the quality of a courtroom pronouncement. "I know, ma'am," Evelyn said. "I've already spoken with Mrs. Adler about the menu." "I wasn't asking about the menu." Margaret set down her fork. "I was informing you because I'd like you to wear the blue dress. Not the one you chose last autumn. The other one. The one that covers your arms properly." Evelyn kept her expression still. "Of course. The Caldwell boy is coming with his new fiancée. She studied in Boston." Margaret paused to let that land. "Accomplished girl, lovely family." "I'm sure she is." Nathaniel turned a page of his correspondence. "Nathaniel." Margaret turned to her son. "I think it would be appropriate for you to speak with the Caldwells about the land dispute before dinner, not during. James Caldwell takes business at the table as a personal affront." "I'm aware of how James Caldwell takes things," Nathaniel said without looking up. "Good." Margaret picked up her fork again. She glanced at Evelyn. "You might also consider having cook prepare the stuffed pheasant. The Caldwells remember the last time we served quail, and I believe there was some dissatisfaction." "The quail was perfectly cooked," Evelyn said. "That isn't the point." "Then what is the point, ma'am?" The question came out more directly than Evelyn intended, or perhaps exactly as she intended. She was no longer entirely sure of the difference. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "The point is that certain families have expectations, and we meet them. I've been meeting them for 2 years. Evelyn said quietly. I believe I understand the expectations. Something shifted in the room. It was almost nothing. A tightening in Margaret's jaw, a slight pause in the sound of Nathaniel's pages turning. The housemaid near the sideboard found something very interesting to examine on the wall. That tone, Margaret said, is not appropriate at the breakfast table. I apologize, ma'am. But she didn't look down. That was the change. She used to look down. Nathaniel finally set his correspondence aside. He looked at Evelyn, not the way a man looks at someone he loves, but the way a man looks at a problem he has been ignoring for long enough that it has developed a voice. There's no need for tension, he said. I agree, Evelyn said. Then perhaps, Margaret said, her voice sharpening at its edges, your wife might consider that this household has a certain standing in this county, and that standing requires Mrs. Whitmore. Evelyn set her cup down. I have managed this household every day for 2 years. I have organized every dinner, mediated every disagreement among the staff, overseen the household accounts, corresponded with every family you've asked me to correspond with, and attended every function you required me to attend. I have done all of this without complaint and without credit. I am asking only to be spoken to as though I am part of this family, not a servant who requires correction at the breakfast table. The silence that followed was total. The housemaid near the sideboard had stopped pretending to examine the wall and was now simply frozen. Margaret sat very straight. Well, Evelyn. Nathaniel's voice was quiet, warning quiet. I'm not being unreasonable, Evelyn said. You are speaking to my mother. I am aware of that. Then you understand this is not how things are done. She looked at him, then really looked at him the way she used to in the early weeks of their marriage, when she was still trying to find the man beneath the posture. Nathaniel, I am asking to be treated with basic respect. That is not a radical request. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said with the measured precision of a man choosing his words the way another man might choose which field to burn. Evelyn, my mother has a right to run her household. Your household. My household. As she sees fit. You knew this when we married. You understood what this arrangement required. That word landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Arrangement. Evelyn heard it, felt it, filed it away in the place where she kept all the other words she had been filing for 2 years. Yes, she said. I understood the arrangement. Good. He reached for his coffee. I'd like you to explain it to me again, she said, in front of your mother, so we're all clear on the terms. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite surprise, but its close cousin. I beg your pardon. You said I understood what the arrangement required. She folded her hands on the table. Tell me what you understood it to require. When you married me. Tell me exactly. The room had gone the particular quality of still that precedes something irreversible. 2 of the guests, a Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove from the neighboring estate, who had arrived the previous evening for a stay of several days and had been breakfasting with the family in the easy manner of long familiarity, had quietly set down their silverware. Neither of them spoke. Margaret started to say something. Nathaniel held up one hand. He looked at his wife across the long expanse of the mahogany table, and Evelyn looked back at him, and she thought she would think this later, turning it over in her mind the way you turn something fragile, that what she saw in his face in that moment was not cruelty. It was the expression of a man who had never been forced to say aloud what he had always simply known and assumed others knew, and who had not yet recognized that saying it would be the kind of thing that could not be unsaid. I married you, he said, because you were suitable. Suitable, she repeated. Capable, trustworthy, from a decent family. He set his cup down. I was not looking for... He stopped. Say it. He looked at her. Go on, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight in it. You have guests, your mother, your staff, and your wife all listening. Say what you mean. Something went through his expression that might in a different man have been shame. But Nathaniel Whitmore had been raised in a tradition that converted shame automatically and without deliberation into defense. "I married you," he said, "because you were a woman who would accept the reality of what I was offering. I was not in a position to pursue a romantic connection. I needed someone reliable, someone who understood that this marriage was a practical matter. You knew that. Did I? You accepted the proposal." "I accepted the proposal," she said carefully, "because I believed that two people could build something real. I believed that. I was wrong. I never deceived you. Nathaniel." Margaret's voice cut in sharp in warning. But he had already gone too far to stop now, or not far enough to have the sense to stay silent. Some men existed in that precise, terrible middle. "I chose you," he said, "because you were the kind of woman a man could trust to manage things properly. I chose you because you did not require, because you were not the kind of woman who would make demands." He stopped again. "Say it plainly," Evelyn said. "Please." And he did. "I chose you because you were not beautiful enough to have other options," he said. "And I needed a woman who would be content with what I was able to give." The word beautiful hung in the summer air of the breakfast room like a verdict. Mrs. Hargrove made a small sound. Her husband reached for her hand. Margaret sat perfectly still. The housemaid near the sideboard was no longer breathing. Evelyn did not cry. She had known in the way you can know something without having the words for it, that something like this was true. She had carried the shape of it for 2 years, without being able to name it. And here it was finally named in front of everyone. She was surprised to find that it didn't break her the way she'd always imagined. It just settled. The way a heavy thing settles when you set it down somewhere permanent. She looked at her husband for a long moment. She looked at the face she had been trying to learn for 2 years. She looked at the mother who had catalogued her deficiencies every morning over coffee. She looked at the Hargroves who had the decency to be appalled. Then she looked at her own hands, still folded on the table, steady, the way they had always been steady, because she had always been the kind of woman who kept her hands still, even when everything else was in motion. She stood. She was not shaking. She smoothed the front of her dress, a habit, a reflex, something she did without thinking, and then she looked at Nathaniel one last time. "Thank you for the clarity, Mr. Whitmore," she said. Then she curtsied. It was a perfect curtsy. Deep composed, the kind she had been taught as a girl and had performed 1,000 times in rooms full of people who expected it. It contained in its formal completion every single thing she had been too well-mannered to say for 2 years. She walked out of the breakfast room. She did not look back. Her bedroom was at the top of the east staircase, and she climbed it with the same steadiness she had brought to everything else this morning. Her hands were still not shaking. She noticed this and found it both strange and fitting that she should have been shaking for 2 years of quiet days, and found herself entirely composed on the worst morning of her marriage. The room was warm. The summer sun came through the east-facing windows early and turned everything amber. She had never particularly liked this room. It was beautiful in the way that rooms in houses like this were beautiful, all coordinated elegance purchased and arranged by Margaret before Evelyn arrived, and never truly felt like hers, but she had learned to move through it without complaint the way she'd learned to move through most things here. She went to the wardrobe. She pulled out the small traveling case she had brought with her when she first arrived at this house as a bride. She had never unpacked it entirely, had always in some place she refused to examine, kept a few essential things inside it. She hadn't known why at the time. She knew now. She opened the case and looked at it for a moment. Then she began to pack. She did not take the dresses Nathaniel had bought. She did not take the jewelry Margaret had given her at Christmas, a gift intended, she understood now, less as generosity than as ornamentation, the way you put a nice frame around a painting you're obligated to display. She did not take any of it. She took 3 dresses of her own. The ones she'd brought from her father's house. The worn green one she wore when she worked in the kitchen garden, because no one cared if it got dirty. A shawl her mother had made. A small book of poetry her sister had pressed into her hands the morning of her wedding, crying in the way younger sisters cry, not because they understand the sadness, but because they sense it. She took her father's pocket watch, which he had given her the year before he died, because he'd had no sons, and he thought she should have something that told time. She took the small writing kit in the rosewood box. She left everything else. It took her less than 20 minutes to pack. She came back down the stairs carrying the case herself. Thomas, the young footman who had been with the household since before her arrival, was at the bottom of the stairs and moved forward automatically to take it from her. "I've got it, Thomas," she said. He hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore, is there a wagon going into town this morning?" He blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Silas is taking goods to Alderman's before noon. Ask him to wait for me, please." Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded. He went. She walked to the front hall. She set the case by the door. She straightened a painting that had been hanging slightly crooked since last Tuesday. She noticed this every time she passed it, and stood for a moment in the house that had been hers for 2 years, and had never, not once, felt like home. Nathaniel appeared in the hallway. He'd followed her. She hadn't expected that. He looked at the traveling case. He looked at her. Something crossed his face that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of something. An apology, possibly. The early, clumsy shape of one. "Evelyn." "I'm not angry," she said. It was true. That was the strange part. "I want you to know that. I'm not angry, Nathaniel." Then, "I'm done," she said. "That's different." He was quiet for a moment. "You can't simply leave." "I'm going to." "Where will you go?" She picked up her case. "Somewhere I was not chosen because no one better was available." He moved forward, not to stop her, or perhaps he intended to. She wasn't certain, but she had already opened the front door, and the summer heat and the smell of Virginia in July came in all at once, the green smell of growing things, and the distant particular sweetness of the tobacco fields, and she walked through the door into it. She did not look back. The wagon was waiting at the edge of the drive. Silas, who was 67 and had been driving wagons for the Whitmore household since before Nathaniel was born, did not ask any questions. This was one of the things Evelyn had always appreciated about Silas. He had a deep fundamental understanding of which things were his business and which were not. He took in the sight of her with her traveling case at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, nodded once and waited while she climbed up onto the bench beside him. "Town," he said. "Town," she said. He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they moved off down the red clay drive, and Evelyn watched the Whitmore estate grow smaller behind her in the summer haze, and she thought 2 years. 2 years of breakfasts and households, and apologizing with her eyes for existing in a space that had never been made for her. 2 years of learning to shrink herself into shapes that fit without complaint, into rooms that were not designed with her in mind. She did not feel sad. She felt for the first time in 2 years as though she could breathe without calculating how much air she was permitted. In Alderman's, which was the nearest town of any consequence, Evelyn went directly to the office of Mr. Prentice, a solicitor who had handled some of her father's estate and who knew her family well enough to be trusted with directness. She sat across from him and explained the situation in 12 minutes. Mr. Prentice, a compact, careful man of 50 with the expression of someone who has heard most things and is surprised by very little, listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You understand," he said, "that the legal position is complicated." "I understand the legal position," she said. "I'm not here for legal counsel this morning. I'm here to ask you to send word to my cousin Agnes in Harlan County. I'll need somewhere to stay while I determine what comes next." He looked at her over his glasses. "Harlan County is nearly 100 miles, Mrs. Whitmore. The mountains." "Yes. It's rough country, particularly in summer." "I know." Another pause. "Your cousin, Agnes Whitfield." "That's right." He nodded slowly, tapping one finger on the surface of his desk. "She's a capable woman, Agnes." "She is," Evelyn said. "That's why I'm going." He studied her for a moment longer, studying, she supposed, the woman who had just walked out of the largest estate in the county with a single traveling case, and the composed expression of someone who has already decided everything and is simply in the process of executing. Then he nodded again. "I'll send word today," he said. "You can wait here. I have a room upstairs my wife uses for guests. You're welcome to it until the stage leaves Thursday." "Thank you, Mr. Prentice." "Mrs. Whitmore." He hesitated. "Are you certain?" She looked at him steadily. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." The stage left Alderman's on Thursday morning. She was on it. She sat by the window and watched Virginia flatten and then begin to rise as the road climbed northward. And she thought about her husband. Not about what he had done, which she had already considered and laid aside, but about what she was going to do with the strange, wide-open feeling that had settled in her chest, like the first morning of a season change. It felt, she thought, like possibility. She was not sure she had ever felt it before. Agnes Whitfield met her at the stage stop in Harlan with a wagon, 2 dogs, and the complete absence of any statement that might be interpreted as pity. She was 42, widowed, and had lived alone in the mountains for 6 years. She had the weathered, capable look of a woman who had decided a long time ago that she was going to manage her own life and had been managing it with considerable competence ever since. She took one look at Evelyn, the composed face, the single traveling case, the absence of any visible distress, and said, "There's a room at the back of the house. It gets the morning light." "Thank you, Agnes." "You eat. Not since this morning." "Come on, then." They did not discuss Nathaniel on the road to Agnes's house. They did not discuss him at dinner. Agnes talked about the summer the crops a mare she was trying to train a neighbor 3 miles east, who had built a new mill and was expecting the whole county to be grateful about it. Evelyn listened. She ate. She felt the mountain air come through the open window and thought that it tasted different from the air in the valley, sharper, cleaner, less complicated by the weight of other people's expectations. After dinner, Agnes set a lamp on the table and looked at her cousin across it. "You staying a while?" she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Good." Agnes picked up her mending. "I've been needing someone to help me argue with Thomas Reed about that fence line. Man's been 5 inches over the property marker for 3 years, and he acts like I'm speaking Greek every time I bring it up." Evelyn almost smiled. "Who is Thomas Reed?" "Neighbor to the north. Good man. Infuriating about fences." Agnes pulled her thread. "You'll meet him. He comes around." "All right." Agnes looked at her again, the direct appraising look that had always been her cousin's particular habit. "You want to talk about it? Not tonight. Whenever you're ready." "Thank you." She took the lamp to the back room and sat on the edge of the bed in the mountain dark, and the quiet of it, the deep, unperformed, uncomplicating quiet of a place that had no opinion about her whatsoever, settled around her like something she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. She opened her sister's book of poetry. She read until the lamp burned low. She slept better than she had in 2 years. In the morning, she went to work. Not because anyone told her to, because she had always been a woman who worked, who found in the specific, tangible tasks of a day something that her mind needed the satisfaction of a thing done. A problem solved, a gap closed. Agnes's property was 60 acres of mountain farmland, rough and honest, nothing elegant about it. The fence on the eastern side was damaged from a fallen tree. The kitchen garden had been planted late and needed tending. There was a barn with a leaking roof that Agnes had been patching herself for 2 seasons. Evelyn assessed all of this in the first morning. By the afternoon, she was in the kitchen garden with her sleeves pushed up, pulling weeds and thinning the carrot rows with the focused attention of someone who has finally found a task equal to their energy. She was on her knees in the dirt when she heard boots on the path behind her. "Miss Agnes isn't home," said a voice. She stood brushing soil from her hands and turned. The man standing on the path was perhaps 40 broad, weathered, with the look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors and had made his peace with it. He had a hat in his hands and the direct, measuring gaze of a man accustomed to looking at land. "She's gone to town," Evelyn said. "I'm her cousin, Evelyn." The man nodded slowly. "Thomas Reed, the fence man." Something moved in his expression. something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to it. She mentioned me. She said you've been 5 inches over the property line for 3 years and act like she's speaking Greek. That is, he said, one way to describe it. He looked at the garden. You're tidying her rows. They needed it. She won't like it. She'll appreciate it when the carrots come in. He looked at her again, the assessing look, but without anything unfriendly in it. You just arrive. 2 days ago. From the valley. Yes, he didn't ask more than that. Something in his face suggested he understood that questions of this kind were not always his to ask, and that a woman with soil on her knees who had come to the mountains without explanation probably had sufficient reason. Tell Agnes I came about the north pasture fence, he said. Post is down. I'll tell her. He nodded. He put his hat back on and turned to go. Mr. Reed. He looked back. Which side is the post on? She said. He paused. A flicker of something amusement possibly or respect crossed his weathered face. Hers, he said. This time. She nodded. I'll tell her. He went. She watched him go. This man who knew where he stood, and knew when he was on the wrong side of a line, and said so without theater, and she thought that there was something almost startling about the simplicity of it. She went back to her weeding. By the end of the first week she had repaired the kitchen garden, helped Agnes draft a letter to a neighboring family about a water rights dispute, and organized the barn loft in a way that made it possible to find things again. By the end of the second week, she had begun walking the surrounding roads in the mornings, not for any particular purpose, but because the mountains in July were an education in themselves, and she found that her mind worked differently when her feet were moving on uneven ground. On these walks, she encountered the village. Gradually, the miller's wife, Mrs. Carney, who had 3 children under 7, and eyes that were always slightly desperate in the specific way of a woman who has too much to do, and no one to help her think through it. Old Mr. Beale, who sat on his porch every morning and had opinions about the weather. The schoolteacher, Miss Ruth Harmon, who was 22, and had been trying to get the village families to let their daughters attend lessons with the same persistence and lack of success for 18 months. Evelyn listened to all of them. She had always been a good listener, had been told so many times often by people who meant it as a compliment, but delivered it in a tone that suggested they were also noting it as a limitation, as though listening were the lesser activity. She did not experience it as lesser. She experienced listening as what it actually was, the collection of information necessary to understand what needed to be done. What needed to be done in this mountain village was considerable. Mrs. Carney needed someone to take her oldest child for reading lessons 2 afternoons a week so she could manage the others. Old Mr. Beale needed the boards on his front step replaced before he put a foot through one of them. Miss Harmon needed someone to speak to the Alderman family, who were the largest landholders in the immediate area and whose opinion carried enough weight to tip 3 or 4 other families in any direction they chose. Evelyn was not by nature a woman who required permission to be useful. She borrowed 2 boards from Agnes and fixed Mr. Beale's steps herself on a Thursday morning. She took Mrs. Carney's eldest for 2 afternoons a week and found in the child a serious, quick-minded girl of 7 named Polly, a student who reminded her of herself at that age in ways that made her chest ache pleasantly. She went to call on the Aldermans with a jar of Agnes's blackberry preserves and spent an afternoon talking about her experiences running a household and organizing accounts for a large estate, and by the time she left, Mrs. Alderman had promised to send her 2 daughters to Miss Harmon's school. None of this made her famous. None of it was the kind of thing that got remarked upon at dinner parties. But people noticed. The way people in small places always notice the person who simply quietly does the things that need doing. Thomas Reed noticed. He came by Agnes's property again. The fence question continued to provide occasions, and Evelyn suspected by now that the fence had become the excuse rather than the reason, and he would sometimes find her on the porch mending or in the garden, and they would talk. Not about much initially. The weather, the road conditions, the state of the Alderman mill. But he listened, the way she listened with full attention, without performing it. One afternoon, he sat on the porch steps while she shelled peas into a bowl and said, "You're good with people." "I like people," she said. Most of them. That's not what I mean. He picked up a pod and began shelling it alongside her without being asked. I mean, you know what they need before they tell you. She thought about this. My husband always said I spent too much time concerning myself with other people's problems. She hadn't planned to say that. It came out the way things do when your hands are busy and your guard is lower than you realize. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Man sounds like he missed something, he said finally. She looked down at the bowl of peas. Yes, she said. He missed quite a lot, I think. They shelled peas in the mountain afternoon, and the sounds of the place the creek below Agnes's fence lined the birds in the big sycamore. The distant movement of something in the pasture were around them, and Evelyn thought that this was the most natural conversation she had had with another person in 2 years. It shouldn't have been remarkable. The fact that it was said everything. Back at the Whitmore estate, it took 4 days for Nathaniel to begin to understand the scope of what had happened. The first day he told himself she would return. She was upset. She had made a scene which was unlike her. He had always valued her composure, and the scene itself troubled him more than the departure, because it had been so public, and the Hargroves were still in the house, and the look on Mrs. Hargrove's face at the breakfast table had been, he set that aside. She would return. She had nowhere else to go. She would return, and they would be sensible about it. The second day he sent a note to Mr. Prentice in Alderman's. Mr. Prentice replied that he was not in a position to share information regarding the private affairs of his clients. On the third day, Margaret came to his study and stood in the doorway with the expression of a woman who has been deciding whether to say something and has made her decision. The household accounts, she said. He looked up from his desk. What about them? I can't find them. He set down his pen. What do you mean you can't find them? I mean that Evelyn managed them, and I don't know where she kept things, and I have been unable to locate the records I need to tell Cook what we can spend this month. She paused. Also, the correspondence with the Caldwells is apparently ongoing about the Thursday visit, and I don't know what was agreed, and the Caldwells sent a note this morning that I can't fully interpret because I don't know what the previous 3 letters said. Nathaniel was quiet. Also, Margaret continued in the tone of someone delivering a series of blows and committed to seeing it through, the staff is confused. There are apparently decisions that Evelyn made on a regular basis that no one has been making, and Thomas, she meant the footman, came to me this morning to ask about something called the roster, and I didn't know what he was talking about. The household ran before she was here, Nathaniel said. Did it? Margaret looked at him steadily. Because I've been living in this house for 40 years, and I'm telling you that in the last 3 days, I have had 17 questions I cannot answer, that I have apparently been asking Evelyn to answer for the past 2 years, without ever noticing that I was doing it. He didn't say anything. She is not, Margaret said with the particular precision of a woman who does not concede things easily, merely decorative. You should know that. You should have known that. Then she left. The 4th day, one of the field workers came to the house with a question about the rotation of the lower pasture, which apparently had a schedule that existed only in Evelyn's records, which were with Evelyn. Nathaniel sat at his desk in the quiet and looked at the household around him, that was without fanfare or drama, very slowly coming apart at the seams. He had called her difficult to love. He had meant it as an explanation. He had thought of it as simple honesty. He sat with it now, and turned it over in the way you turn over something you thought was one thing, and realize is another. And what it was, what it had always been. He understood now, with the particular cold clarity of a man who has lost something, and can finally see its shape in its absence, was not honesty at all. It was cowardice. It was the cowardice of a man who had been given something of genuine value, and had told himself and her that it wasn't enough, rather than admitting that the failure of feeling was in him. He sat with this for a long time. Then he called for a horse. He rode hard the first day and learned nothing useful. Nathaniel Whitmore had not ridden hard in years. He had forgotten what it cost, the way it emptied your mind of everything, except the immediate, the road, the animal beneath you, the heat pressing down from a Virginia summer sky that had no interest in a man's private reckoning. He stopped twice. He asked at a crossroads tavern whether anyone had seen a woman matching Evelyn's description traveling north. The barkeep looked at him with the particular blankness of a man who had learned that strangers asking questions about women were not always asking for innocent reasons, and said he couldn't say. He slept badly in a room above the tavern and was back on the road before dawn. The second day he reached Alderman's. He tied his horse at the post outside Prentice's office and walked in without knocking, which was the habit of a man who had spent his whole life in rooms that opened for him. Mr. Prentice looked up from his desk. "Mr. Whitmore," he said without surprise and without warmth, "I need to know where she went." "Good morning," Prentice said. He set down his pen. "Sit down if you like." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know—" "I heard what you want." Prentice folded his hands on the desk. "I'm not going to tell you. And before you remind me of your standing in this county, let me spare us both the time. Your standing does not extend to the private affairs of my clients." Nathaniel stood in the center of the small office and felt something he was entirely unaccustomed to, which was the specific frustration of a man who has always been able to apply pressure to a situation, and is discovering that pressure has no purchase here. "She is my wife," he said. "She is," Prentice agreed. "And she made a choice. And she made it here in front of me in 12 minutes with complete clarity. I've known Evelyn Harper since she was 15 years old. She was not confused." He looked at Nathaniel steadily. "Are you—" The question was not unkind. That made it worse. Nathaniel sat down. He sat in the chair across from the solicitor and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor, and there was a long moment in which the only sound was the street noise coming through the single window and the particular internal sound a man makes when he is trying to find the words for something he has never tried to put into words before. "I said something I cannot take back," he said finally. "Yes. I need to find her. I know you do." Prentice was quiet for a moment. "The question I'd ask you, and I say this as a man who has handled enough estates and enough wills and enough family arrangements in this county to know how these things tend to end, is what you plan to do when you find her." Nathaniel looked up. "Because if you find her," Prentice continued, "and you bring her back and you continue in the way you've been continuing, you will not have fixed anything. You will only have returned a woman to a house she had the courage to leave." The words hung in the office air. "Tell me where she is," Nathaniel said. Prentice studied him. The study of a man looking for something specific and not yet certain he's found it. Then he said, "I'll tell you this. She has family in the mountains, north of here. That's all I'll give you." It was enough. Nathaniel left Alderman's within the hour. He rode north. The road into the mountains was not the kind of road the Whitmore Estates grounds had prepared him for. It was rough root-crossed, with long sections where the hill made the footing uncertain, and the trees pressed close enough that the light came through in pieces. He was not a man who noticed landscape as a general rule. But the mountain road had a quality to it that was difficult to ignore, the way it demanded attention, the way it refused to allow the comfortable kind of thinking that flatland and open sky permitted. He stopped at a mill at the base of a long climb. An old man was sitting outside. He had the unhurried look of someone who had been sitting in the same spot for most of his life and had no particular plans to change that. Nathaniel asked about the road ahead. The man pointed. He said the road wound north for another 12 miles before it flattened. He said there were 2 settlements, one near a creek crossing, one higher up toward the ridge. He said, "You looking for someone?" "A woman," Nathaniel said. "Brown hair, quiet. Came up this road about 3 weeks ago." The old man thought about this. "Don't know about quiet," he said finally. "But there's a woman up at the Whitfield place that fixed my porch step last week without being asked. Agnes Whitfield's cousin. Come from the valley." He looked at Nathaniel with the particular attention of an old man who has seen enough to recognize the shape of certain stories. "That who you looking for?" Nathaniel felt something move in his chest relief. Yes, but underneath it, something more complicated. The kind of thing that happens when you've been chasing something and suddenly find that it has not been waiting for you. "Might be," he said. "She asked if I needed anything else while she was there. the old man said. Nobody's asked me that in about 4 years. He looked at Nathaniel again. Don't know what kind of fool lets a woman like that go, but I reckon that ain't my business. He looked back at the road. Nathaniel rode on. The Whitfield property sat on a cleared rise above the creek, 60 acres of mountain farmland that had the organized, tended look of a place someone had recently imposed order on. He could see the kitchen garden from the road. It had been planted and weeded in careful rows, the kind of rows that came from someone who understood the work and had done it with attention. He recognized the attention. He knew in a way that was already beginning to hurt him in ways he had not anticipated who had done this. He tied his horse at the gate. Agnes Whitfield answered the door before he knocked. She had the look of a woman who had heard a horse coming and had made a series of rapid calculations and arrived at a conclusion that didn't particularly please her. She looked at him. She looked at the horse. She looked at him again. Agnes Whitfield, he said. Who's asking? Nathaniel Whitmore. Something moved in her face. Not surprise, she had been expecting something clearly, if not necessarily him specifically, but a readjustment, the expression of a woman updating an estimate. She ain't here, Agnes said. When will she be back? Couldn't say. Ma'am? He took his hat off. Not the gesture of a powerful man deploying courtesy as a tool, but something closer to genuine, which surprised him as he did it. I've ridden 2 days. I'm not here to drag her back to anything. I need to see her. Agnes looked at him for a long moment. The look of a woman who has spent 42 years developing an accurate sense of men and their intentions, and who trusts that sense more than she trusts almost anything else. She's down at the schoolhouse, she said finally. Other side of the creek, half a mile. She let a beat of silence land. You upset her, I'll hear about it. And I got opinions about men who upset women in my county. Yes, ma'am, he said. Go on then. He went. The schoolhouse was a single-room building beside the creek, with 2 windows that let in the afternoon light at a low angle, and he could hear the voices before he got to the door. A child's voice, first high clear, reading aloud, with the careful concentration of someone still learning to let the words come naturally. Then a woman's voice, quiet, patient, guiding without correcting. Try it again, she said. Start from the river. Don't rush it. He stopped outside the door. He should have walked in. He had come 2 days for this. But he stood outside the schoolhouse door and listened to his wife teach a child to read, and something happened in him that he could not immediately name. It was not the soft thing people meant when they described a heart changing. It was harder than that. Sharper, more like a bone being set after it had healed wrong, the kind of correction that fixes the damage but is not at the moment of fixing painless. He had told himself for 2 years that he understood Evelyn. He had thought of himself as a man who assessed situations clearly and without sentiment. He had believed that he understood the value of the things he had. He had understood nothing. The child inside finished the passage. There was a pause. That was much better, Evelyn said. You see how different it sounds when you don't hurry it, when you let each word have its own space. It sounds more real, the child said. Yes, Evelyn said. That's exactly right. More real. Nathaniel put his hand flat on the door frame and stood there with the sound of his wife's voice in his ears. He had spent 2 days on the road telling himself what he would say when he found her. He had composed speeches. He had arranged arguments. He had catalogued the genuine changes he intended to make, the specific ways he intended to be different, the evidence he would offer. He stood outside the schoolhouse door, and all of that dissolved, because the evidence was already here, and it had nothing to do with him. It was Evelyn teaching a child to read in a mountain schoolhouse. It was Agnes Whitfield's kitchen garden in ordered rows. It was an old man with a fixed porch step. It was a county that hadn't known her 3 weeks ago, and already in its quiet, practical way had organized itself around her. Not because she had demanded it, not because of her name or her husband's land, or any of the things that were supposed to confer importance. Because she was simply, genuinely, entirely herself. And he had looked at that and called it insufficient. The door opened. Evelyn stood in the doorway with a small girl at her side, holding a primer, and looking up at Nathaniel with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend not to stare. Evelyn looked at him, and for one unguarded moment, her expression showed him something he knew he had no right to surprise, yes. And something beneath it that was more complicated, and that she controlled immediately, resettling her face into the composed look he had always known. The child said, "Who's that?" "A visitor," Evelyn said. Her voice was level. "Run along home, Polly. Practice the next passage." "Yes, ma'am." The girl went, casting one more long look at Nathaniel as she passed. Then they were alone beside the creek, and the sounds of the mountain afternoon were around them, and Nathaniel held his hat in his hands and looked at his wife. She had her sleeves rolled up. There was soil on her left hand that she hadn't quite finished cleaning. Her hair was pinned but loose in the way that happened when you'd been working and forgot about it. She looked, he searched for the word and found it, and it sat in him uncomfortably free. Not happy in a simple way, but free in a way that she had never looked inside his house. "Nathaniel," she said, just that. His name. No warmth in it, but no hostility either. Something more unsettling than either neutrality. The sound of a woman who has already moved through anger and grief and has arrived somewhere that doesn't particularly need him in it. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I can see that." She looked at him steadily. "You could have sent a letter." "I didn't want to send a letter." "Why not?" He opened his mouth and found to his considerable frustration that the speeches had not come back. "Because a letter isn't because I needed to be here, to say it here, in front of you." She was quiet. "I know what I said," he started. "I know you know," she said. "That's not the interesting part." He stopped. "The interesting part," she said, "is why you said it. Not because you're cruel, Nathaniel. I've never thought you were cruel. The interesting part is what it tells me about what you believed, what you've believed from the beginning." He didn't speak. "You believed I had no other options," she said. "You believed that I should be grateful, that the fact of being chosen by someone like you was itself a sufficient gift regardless of how the choosing felt to me." She tilted her head slightly. "That is not cruelty. That's something worse. That's a man who never looked at me long enough to see me at all." The words were quiet. They were also precise in the way of someone who has done a great deal of thinking and arrived at a conclusion she is willing to defend. "You're right," he said. She blinked. That apparently surprised her. "I'm not arguing with any of it," he said. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to take you back. I don't mean it like that. I don't mean it as a property matter. He stopped because he was making exactly the kind of speech he hadn't wanted to make, all wrong angles and catching on itself. He looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I rode 2 days because I needed you to know that I understand what I said. Not just that it was wrong, but why it was wrong. Because it was—" He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "It was the opposite of the truth, and I said it as though it was simple fact." She watched him. "You weren't the one without options," he said. "I was. I was the one who required someone with your particular— I needed someone like you, and I told myself and everyone else that I was doing you a favor." The creek moved below them. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. "What do you want, Nathaniel?" "To know if there's anything left to salvage. Between us." "Yes." She was quiet again, and the quiet had the quality of genuine consideration, not the pause of a woman performing deliberation, but the actual interior process of a woman who takes her own thinking seriously and gives it the time it deserves. "You came here," she said. "That's not nothing." "No, but coming here isn't enough." She looked at him directly. "An apology isn't enough. I've given you no reason to believe that I require less than a real accounting, Nathaniel. I never have." "I know. So what are you offering?" He stood there with his hat in his hands in front of the mountain schoolhouse and understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he was in a situation that could not be managed, could not be ordered, or purchased, or arranged. could only be navigated honestly with no certainty of outcome. It was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm being honest with you. I don't know exactly what I can offer that would mean anything to you, but I'm asking you not to close the door before I find out." She looked at him for a very long moment. Then she said, "Don't make promises. I've had enough promises." "All right. If you stay, and I'm not telling you to stay, I'm telling you what the condition would be if you do it honestly. No speeches. No gestures designed to impress me. If you actually want to understand what you missed, stay and watch it. It's all still here." Where would I stay? Something passed through her expression, not humor exactly, but close to it. "That's your problem to solve. Agnes Whitfield is not a hotel, and I won't ask her to be." "I'll manage. You're accustomed to managing things," she said. "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to manage yourself. That's considerably harder." He held her gaze. "I know." She looked at him one more time, the long, clear, unflinching look of a woman who has already learned the cost of misreading a man and has no intention of making that particular mistake twice. Then she said, "Thomas Reed has a room, north side of the ridge. He takes in a hand sometimes when the work requires it. He won't charge you much, and he won't ask your business." She paused. "He's a fair man. You might learn something." Then she turned and went back into the schoolhouse. He stood by the creek in the mountain afternoon and listened to the door close behind her, and he thought that he had been granted something that was not forgiveness, and not reconciliation, and not any of the things he had ridden 2 days imagining. He had been granted the most daunting thing a man like him could receive, a chance to be worth something without the estate behind him to prove it. He put his hat back on. He found Thomas Reed's property an hour before dark. Reed answered the door with the same unhurried quality he brought to everything. The look of a man who registered Nathaniel completely and made no comment on what he registered. "Thomas Reed," Nathaniel said. "That's right. I need a room. Work in exchange if you have it." Reed looked at him, took in the good coat, the good horse, the hands that had not spent a significant portion of their life in physical labor. "For how long?" Reed said. "I don't know yet." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then, "Supper's already done, but there's bread on the board if you need it." He stepped back from the door. "Room's at the top of the stairs. Mind the third step, it's loose." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Reed said. "Work starts at sunup." He meant it. The first morning, Nathaniel was up before dawn because Reed knocked on his door before dawn. He was taken to the north fence line, the same fence he would learn later that had been Reed's long-running disagreement with Agnes Whitfield, and handed a post driver and shown where the line needed resetting. He had not driven a fence post in his life. He did not say this. He took the post driver and he tried. He got it wrong twice. Reed watched him get it wrong both times, and then without comment or condescension, came and showed him the correct angle and the correct grip and the rhythm of it. "Again," Reed said. He drove the post. It wasn't good, but it was better. "Again," Reed said. By noon he had driven 11 posts, and his hands were blistered, and he had not complained once because something in Reed's manner made complaint feel irrelevant. At noon they ate at a rough table in Reed's kitchen. Bread, cold meat, well water. Nothing like the Whitmore breakfast table. The absence of ceremony was so complete that it had its own quality, not lack, but a different kind of sufficiency. Reed ate without talking. Nathaniel found that this did not bother him the way silence in social situations usually did. It was a different kind of silence. A working silence. The silence of men who have already said with their hands what needed saying. "You're the husband," Reed said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Nathaniel said. Reed nodded once. He drank his water. "She's doing good work up here," he said. "Those kids she's teaching. Agnes's farm. The Carney family. People have noticed." "I know." "Did you know before?" It was a simple question, entirely without accusation. That made it harder to deflect. "No," Nathaniel said. "Not the way I should have." Reed looked at him. The assessing look of a man who takes stock. Why not? Nathaniel thought about this. Not the rehearsed answer, the version of the story he'd been preparing where he came out as a man with comprehensible failures, a man who had erred and recognized it. The honest answer. Because I was looking at what she didn't have, he said, instead of what she was. Reed was quiet. I told myself I was being practical, Nathaniel said. I told myself I was a man who understood value clearly. I had a very organized notion of what value looked like. She didn't fit that notion, and I never adjusted the notion. I adjusted my expectations of her instead. Reed picked up his bread. Man gets very good at measuring things his own way, he said. Stops noticing that the measuring stick is the problem. Yes. Ain't easy to pick up a different one. No. Reed looked at him steadily. She know you're staying a while. She told me to come to you. Something in Reed's expression shifted small, nearly invisible, but it was there. The expression of a man who has been handed information he considers significant. She send you here specifically? Yes. Reed set his bread down. He looked at his water glass. Then he looked at Nathaniel again. She doesn't do things without reasons, he said. Thought you should know that. Nathaniel held that. He turned it over. I know, he said. The afternoon work was harder than the morning. Reed had him clearing a section of stone wall that had collapsed at the eastern corner, sorting the stones by size for reuse. It was not skilled work, but it required attention. The wrong stone placed wrong would mean the wall would need doing again in a season. Reed showed him once what he was looking for. He didn't show him twice. The sun was well down when they finished. Nathaniel's back ached in places he hadn't known could ache. His hands were worse than they'd been at noon. He didn't say any of this. On the way back to the house, Reed stopped at the edge of the property and looked north toward Agnes Whitfield's rise. She comes by here sometimes, he said. Mornings, checking on the fence situation. A pause. You're here. I know. She'll know you're here by morning. I reckon she will, Nathaniel said. Reed looked at him. Something in his expression that might have been the very beginning of something like approval. You talk like a man from the valley. I am a man from the valley. Yeah. Reed turned toward the house. But you fixed 11 fence posts today and didn't quit. That's something. He went inside. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the property in the last of the summer light and looked up at the darkening mountain above him. And he thought about the man he had been 2 weeks ago in the breakfast room of his estate, and he thought about the man who had driven 11 fence posts today and eaten bread and cold meat without comment. And he thought that the distance between those two men was less about circumstances and more about something he had not yet entirely located in himself. He was looking for it. That was new. The next morning, he was at the fence line again at sunup. And Evelyn came by on her morning walk at 7:30, the way Reed had said she would, and she stopped at the edge of the property and looked at Nathaniel with a post driver in his hands and blisters on his palms, and the careful, deliberate expression of a man learning something slowly. She looked at him for a moment. She didn't say anything. But she didn't look away. And in the particular language of two people who have known each other long enough to read the things that don't get spoken that meant something. What it meant exactly, Nathaniel could not yet say. But he picked up the post driver, and he kept working. Because that was the only thing in this place in this moment that was going to mean anything at all. He drove fence posts for 3 days before Evelyn spoke to him again beyond a morning nod. He didn't push it. He had arrived at Thomas Reed's property with 2 days of road on him and a lifetime of assuming that his presence in a situation was itself a form of action, and the mountains were quietly, efficiently correcting that assumption. Reed woke him before sunup. The work was physical and specific and unforgiving of inattention. At night, he was too tired to compose speeches, which was, he was beginning to understand, probably the point. On the 4th morning, she stopped at the fence line instead of walking past it. She stood on her side of the property marker, Agnes's side, which was also, he was aware, a deliberate choice of positioning, and watched him work for a moment without speaking. He kept working. He had learned from Reed that stopping to perform awareness of being watched was the kind of thing that told people more about you than you intended. "Your grip is wrong," she said. He paused, looked at his hands, looked at her. "Reed showed me," he said. "Reed showed you how Reed does it. You've got longer arms. You'd get more force if you choked up on the handle." He adjusted his grip. He drove the post. It went in cleaner than it had all morning. He straightened and looked at her. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. She looked at the line of posts he'd set. She was doing the thing she always did, taking in the whole of a situation with that quiet cataloging attention that he had spent 2 years misidentifying as passivity. "Reed's having you reset the whole north line," she said. "Apparently. That's 3 weeks of work." "I know." She looked at him, then directly the way she had at the schoolhouse door. "Are you planning to stay 3 weeks?" "I'm planning to stay until I've done what I came to do," he said. "And what is that exactly?" He set the post driver down. This was not a conversation to have with a tool in his hands, not because of ceremony, but because what he was about to say required that he not be doing anything else while he said it. "I came to understand what I missed. I can't undo what I said. I know that. But I spent 2 years not seeing what was in front of me, and I'm trying to correct that. Here, where you are, because I think that's the only place I can actually do it." She was quiet for a moment. "You can't learn who I am," she said, "by watching me from Reed's fence line." "I know. So stop watching me from the fence line." And she turned and walked back up toward Agnes's house. He stood with the post driver and the morning sun and the particular sensation of a man who has just been told in the most direct possible terms that the next step is his to take. He took it that afternoon. Evelyn was at Agnes's kitchen table with a stack of papers that turned out to be correspondence for 3 different families in the village, disputes, requests, letters to county officials that required careful phrasing. He had seen her manage correspondence at the estate, but he had watched it the way you watch household management happen, aware of it as function, not as skill. He sat across from her without being invited. She looked up. "What are those?" he said. She considered whether to answer. Then she said, "The Carney family needs to petition the county about a water rights question. The Beals need someone to write to the land office about a survey error from 12 years ago that's affecting their deed. Miss Harmon wants a letter to the county board requesting formal recognition for the school. You write all of these. They can't afford a solicitor." He looked at the papers. "You trained with a solicitor." "I read my father's library," she said. "He had 4 law books, and I read all of them twice because we didn't have much else, and I was curious." She picked up her pen. "I know it's not formal training. I wasn't—" He stopped, tried again. "I wasn't criticizing. I was surprised. I didn't know." "You didn't ask." The words were simple, no anger in them, just fact. "No," he said. "I didn't." She looked at him for a moment. Then she set her pen down again, a small concession he understood to the reality of this conversation. "What did you think I did with my time at the estate?" "I thought you managed the house." "I did manage the house. What did you think that meant?" He opened his mouth, closed it. He was discovering with some regularity now that the things he had thought he understood about his wife were revealed on examination to be remarkably thin. "I thought it meant the staff, the meals, the social calendar. I managed the household accounts for 240 acres, she said. I corresponded with 6 neighboring families on your behalf because you didn't have time, and your mother found letter writing tedious. I resolved 3 disputes among your field workers that could have become legal problems. I identified a billing error in your grain contracts that saved you $400 over 2 seasons. She looked at him steadily. I did all of this, and you thanked me once in passing in the 2nd month of our marriage. After that, you appear to have concluded it was simply happening on its own. The kitchen was very quiet. I'm sorry, he said. I know. That's not sufficient. I know that too. She picked up her pen again. But you said it like you meant it. That's different from the last time. He watched her write for a moment, the precise, unhurried movement of someone who has made peace with the fact that the work is long and the work is worth doing. He thought about the 4 law books in her father's library. He thought about a 15-year-old girl reading legal text because she was curious and there was nothing else. He had told her in front of witnesses that he had chosen her because no better woman was available. He sat with that. He had been sitting with it for days, but sitting with Evelyn across from him watching her pen move across the Carney petition, it had a weight it hadn't had in the abstract, a specific, undeniable gravity. "Can I help?" he said. She looked up. "With those," he said. "I know the county land office. I know the water rights process in this district. I could, if it would be useful, I could tell you what language they respond to." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. Then, she slid the Beale letter across the table. "Tell me what's wrong with it," she said. He read it. She had the substance exactly right, but the formal address was one procedural step removed from where it needed to go. She'd written to the county recorder when the survey dispute required the state land commission. He told her this. She listened. She asked 2 precise questions. He answered them. She rewrote the address, and the opening paragraph asked him to read it again. It was better. They worked until the light changed. It was the longest conversation they had ever had. He walked back to Reed's property in the mountain dusk, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, which was the specific satisfaction of having been genuinely useful to someone who did not require the performance of usefulness, but only the thing itself. He had not known he was missing it. He had not known, if he was honest, that it was possible to miss something you had never had. The first real test came 5 days later, and arrived in the form of a wagon. It came up the mountain road on a Wednesday morning, a good wagon well maintained with a driver Nathaniel recognized from the Whitmore estate, and a passenger he recognized with a cold, distinct drop of feeling in his chest, his mother. Margaret Whitmore descended from the wagon with the composure of a woman who has identified a problem and taken decisive action to address it, which was what she had always done and would always do. She had on her best black dress because she always did. She looked at the mountain landscape around her with the expression of someone conducting a property assessment on territory they had no intention of purchasing. She had not told him she was coming. He found out because Reed came to the fence line where Nathaniel was working and said without preamble, "Wagon from the valley, woman in black, asking at the creek crossing where to find the Whitfield property." Nathaniel set down the post driver. He got to Agnes's house 10 minutes after his mother did. Agnes Whitfield answered the door and led Margaret Whitmore to the front room with the precise hospitality of a woman who is being civil because it is the correct thing to do and not for any other reason. Evelyn was at the table. She stood when Margaret came in. Her face had the still, composed quality he recognized from the breakfast room, the expression that meant she was managing something. Margaret looked at Evelyn. Then she looked at Nathaniel, who appeared in the doorway behind Agnes. "I see you've been found," Margaret said to him. "Mother." "I did not come here to speak to you," she said with the clarity of a woman who has made this decision deliberately and intends to execute it precisely as planned. She turned to Evelyn. "I came to speak to your wife, if she'll permit it." Evelyn looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Agnes, would you mind?" Agnes made a sound that communicated in one syllable her full opinion of the situation and her intention to comply anyway. She went to the kitchen. The door stayed open, Agnes's concession to the property being, after all, hers. Nathaniel moved to follow her. "I said I didn't come to speak to you," Margaret said. He stopped. "Nathaniel." Evelyn looked at him. It was a request, not a command. He went to the kitchen. He stood in Agnes's kitchen with Agnes, who was making coffee with the focused attention of a woman removing herself from a situation she would rather be in. "Your mother's something," Agnes said. "She is," Nathaniel agreed. "Question is what?" He didn't answer. He was listening. In the front room, Margaret sat down without being asked. She set her bag on the floor beside her chair. She looked at Evelyn the way she had always looked at Evelyn, the full comprehensive look that usually preceded a list of deficiencies. This time, she did not produce the list. "I have something to tell you," she said, "and I am going to tell it to you plainly, because I have found in 61 years that plainness is more efficient than anything else." "All right," Evelyn said. She sat. "The morning you left." Margaret said, "I sat in the breakfast room for an hour after everyone else had gone. I sat there because I didn't know where else to go. That is an unusual situation for me. I have always known where to go." She was quiet for a moment. "What my son said to you was wrong." Evelyn was very still. "It was wrong, and it was also, I want to say this correctly, it was something I contributed to." Margaret's voice had changed. Not softer exactly. Margaret did not do soft, but more careful. The way a precise person is careful when precision is costing them something. "I told myself for 2 years that my concerns about you were about propriety, about the household, about the way things are done. I was not honest about what they actually were." "What were they?" Evelyn said. "Fear," Margaret said. "My son was the only thing I had managed to hold on to correctly, and you were someone who was clearly going to change him." She looked at Evelyn directly. "I did not want him changed, even when the changing was clearly necessary." A pause. "I owe you an apology. I am giving you one. I recognize it doesn't repair anything. I am giving it anyway because it is owed." The front room was quiet. Evelyn looked at this woman who had catalogued her failures at every breakfast table for 2 years and said quietly, "I don't blame you for him. I know, but I blame myself in part." Margaret looked at her. "He learned from me that women are to be managed. I taught him that by example. His father taught him worse things than that, and I allowed it, and I have had to find a way to live with that." She picked up her bag. She was not staying clearly. She had come to say one thing, and she had said it. "I don't know what you decide about your marriage. That is not my business. It should never have been my business, and the fact that I made it my business was the first problem." She stood. "But I want you to know that if you come back, things will be different. That is a promise, not a request. I am not asking you to return. I am telling you that the house is different now because I am in it differently." She moved toward the door. "That's all." She paused with her hand on the doorframe. "You're doing good work up here," she said. "I asked at the creek crossing. They told me things." She didn't elaborate. She went to the kitchen doorway. "Nathaniel, I'm going back." "I'll ride out with you," he said. "You'll stay where you are," she said. "You still have work to do." She looked at him with the particular look of a woman who has spent 34 years knowing a person and is looking at them now with something new in the knowing. "Don't waste it." She left. They heard the wagon move off down the mountain road. Agnes set a coffee cup on the table in front of Evelyn and one in front of Nathaniel and said, "Well?" She sat down. "That's a woman who spent a long time getting to something true. Give her credit for getting there." Evelyn looked at the coffee in front of her. Her hands were wrapped around the cup, and she was very still in the way she was still when she was doing serious interior work. "She didn't have to come," she said finally. "No," Nathaniel said. "She didn't." Evelyn looked at him. "Did you know she was coming?" "No." She searched his face, found apparently what she needed to find. She looked back at her cup. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it today," Agnes said practically. "Drink your coffee." Evelyn almost smiled. It was the closest she had come to it in front of him since he'd arrived. He filed it away as the most important thing that had happened in several days. The twist came from a direction he hadn't anticipated, which was the direction twists usually came from. It was a man named Hargrove, not the Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, who had been guests at his breakfast table on the morning everything broke, but their son Carter Hargrove, who was 28 and had recently inherited his father's legal practice in the county seat, and apparently had opinions about Whitmore estate business that he'd been developing quietly for some time. Nathaniel found this out because a letter arrived at Reed's property, forwarded from Alderman's, that informed him in careful legal language that in his absence from the estate, certain questions had arisen regarding the disposition of 2 parcels of the lower farmland, and that Carter Hargrove was representing the interests of a neighboring landowner who believed those parcels to be in dispute. He read the letter twice. Then he went to find Evelyn. She was at the schoolhouse. He waited at the door this time, and she came out when the lesson finished, and he handed her the letter without preamble. She read it. He watched her face as she read. "Talbot," she said. "Do you know him?" "Alderman Talbot. He owns the property east of your lower south field." She looked up. "He's been making noise about that boundary for years. I heard him talking at the Caldwell dinner last spring. He thinks your grandfather's original survey was 200 feet short of the actual creek line." "He's wrong. I know he's wrong. I have the original survey documents." She stopped. "I have them. I organized the estate records in the first month of our marriage. They're in the green folder in the left drawer of your study desk." She was quiet for a moment. "Which you may not be able to access if Carter Hargrove has filed something formally because the county office would have Evelyn." She stopped. "I need those documents," he said. "And I can't go back to get them without leaving here, which I'm not willing to do right now, and I can't ask—" He stopped himself. She was looking at him. Something had shifted in her expression, something he couldn't fully read. "You can't ask me," she said. "I wasn't going to say that." "You were thinking it." He was. He had been standing at the schoolhouse door thinking, "I cannot ask her to solve this for me. I spent 2 years asking her to solve things for me without knowing I was doing it. And this is either the moment to learn to handle my own affairs, or I am going to repeat the same arrangement in a different county." "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that I got myself into this situation by leaving the estate without proper arrangements, and I have no right to bring it to you." She looked at him for a long, considering moment. Then she said, "The green folder left drawer. You know where your study desk is. If you write to Silas tonight and describe exactly what you need, he can have it at the stage office in Alderman's within 4 days. You don't need to go back." "You'd tell me that." "It's your estate, Nathaniel. I'm not withholding information about its management to make a point." She looked at him directly. "But you should write the letter yourself. Don't send it through your lawyer. Write to Silas. He knows where everything is because I taught him. He'll know what you mean." He took the letter back from her. "All right." "There's something else," she said. He waited. "If Hargrove is filing on Talbot's behalf, it's not just about the survey. Talbot has been waiting for a moment of weakness. He thinks you being away is that moment." She folded her hands in front of her. "You need to respond within 10 days, or he can establish a claim of uncontested dispute." "I know the process. Then you also know that you need to appear in person before the county assessor to affirm your position or send a legal representative." She looked at him. "You don't have 10 days to finish what you came here to do, and also handle the county assessor." The reality of this settled between them. "So I need to go back," he said. "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" She was quiet. She had the expression of a woman who has worked something through and is deciding whether to say what she's concluded. "I'm saying," she said slowly, "that your life is not separate from mine. It never was. What happens to the estate happens to me legally, regardless of where I am. If Talbot establishes a contested claim and you're not there to answer it, the legal situation becomes complicated for both of us." She looked at him steadily. "I'm also saying that I have the survey notes in my head because I read them 4 years ago when I was learning the property boundaries, and if you need someone to write the legal response, I can do it faster than your lawyer, and I won't charge you." He stared at her. "Close your mouth," she said. He did. "You look surprised," she said. "Don't be surprised that I can help you. That's the thing you're supposed to have already fixed." It landed exactly as she intended. Not unkindly, precisely. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing," she said. "It takes time away from working." He almost smiled. She saw it. "She's And for one unguarded moment, something crossed her face, a flash of warmth, brief and quickly controlled, but there. He saw it. He knew he wasn't supposed to comment on it. He filed it in the same place he'd filed the near smile from Agnes's kitchen. They worked on the legal response that afternoon, side by side at the schoolhouse table after the children left. She wrote from memory the survey measurements, the creek line, the reference markers that established the Whitmore boundary with the precision of someone who had read those documents carefully and retained them the way she retained everything that mattered. He added the formal procedural elements. She corrected his citations twice. He didn't argue with the corrections. She glanced at him each time, expecting argument, and when it didn't come, something in her posture eased slightly. He noticed that too. By the time they finished, the letter was better than anything his lawyer would have produced in 2 days of billing. "You should have been a solicitor," he said. She looked at him. "Women aren't solicitors. I know." He looked at the letter in his hands. "I'm saying you should have been one anyway. That you're as good as any I've worked with." He met her eyes. "Better than most." She looked at him for a moment. Then she took the letter and folded it. "I'll write the envelope," she said. "Your handwriting is illegible on anything smaller than a deed." He gave her the pen. She wrote the address in her clear, precise hand, and he watched her do it, and he thought about 4 law books in her father's library, and a 15-year-old girl who was curious. He thought about 2 years of breakfasts where he had looked at the space beside him and seen a satisfactory arrangement. He thought about Thomas Reed saying, "Man gets very good at measuring things his own way." He had been using the wrong measuring stick for so long, he had forgotten there were others. Reed found him that evening on the porch and sat down beside him without ceremony. "Here you're dealing with a land matter," Reed said. "Word travels fast." "Small place." Reed was quiet for a moment. "She helped you with it?" "Yes." "You asked her or she offered?" Nathaniel thought about this. "Something in between." Reed nodded. He looked out at the mountain dark. "That's progress," he said. "Is it?" "She doesn't offer things to people who don't deserve them," Reed said. "She did with the old man Beale and the Carney kids and the Harmon girls' school. But those are people who need something and can't ask for it right." He paused. "You're not in that category. You could ask. You could demand legally. She offered anyway." He looked at Nathaniel. "Think about why." Nathaniel sat with this. "She's not forgiving me," he said. "No," Reed agreed. "Not yet. But she's deciding," Reed said. "There's a difference. Forgiveness is what comes after. Deciding is what's happening now." He stood. "Don't rush the deciding." He went inside. Nathaniel sat on the porch alone and listened to the mountain night and thought about Evelyn at the schoolhouse table, her pen moving across the envelope in her clear, steady hand, and the flash of warmth he'd seen in her face for one unguarded moment. And he understood something that he had not understood when he rode up from the valley. He had come here expecting to fix something. He had expected the fixing to be about him, his apology, his effort, his demonstration of change. But the fixing, if there was going to be any, was not going to be about him at all. It was going to be about whether he could learn finally to look at her clearly enough to see the decision she was in the middle of making, not whether she would choose him, whether she would choose herself with him beside her in a way that was actually different from the way it had been. That was what she was deciding, and he could not influence it by working. He could not influence it by apologizing. He could not fix it by writing legal letters or driving fence posts or eating bread and cold meat without complaint. The only thing that would matter in the end was whether he was actually the thing he was trying to become. Whether the change was real. He didn't know yet. That was the most honest thought he'd had since he left the valley. He sat with it in the dark for a long time, and in the morning when Reed knocked on his door before sunup, he got up. He went to the fence line. He picked up the post driver. Because it was the only true thing he knew how to do right now, to show up and do the work, and not ask for credit for it. And somewhere across the property line in Agnes Whitfield's house, with the morning light coming through the east window, Evelyn Harper was already awake. She was already thinking, and the decision she was in the middle of making was turning quietly like a wheel that has found its proper ground. The letter to Silas brought results in 4 days exactly as Evelyn had predicted. A rider came up the mountain road on a Saturday morning with a leather satchel that contained the green folder. 3 additional documents Silas had apparently decided were relevant based on his own judgment, and a note in Silas's careful handwriting that said only, "Found these 2. Thought you might need them. The house is quiet, sir. Hope you're well." Nathaniel read the note twice. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket and didn't speak for a moment. Reed watched him from across the table. "Good news. My footman sent the right documents without being asked," Nathaniel said. "That a surprise?" He thought about it. It shouldn't be. He learned from Evelyn. He set the satchel on the table. "Everything in this house runs on things she built. I just didn't know it." Reed poured coffee and didn't say anything, which was his particular form of commentary on everything. Nathaniel took the folder to Evelyn that morning. She was at Agnes's table with Polly Carney and 2 other children from the village Saturday lessons apparently, which nobody had told him existed, but which had clearly been running for some time. She looked up when he came in. He held up the folder. She excused herself from the children and came to the door. She opened the folder. She went through the documents quickly, the practiced efficiency of a woman who knows exactly what she's looking for. She pulled one page out and held it at an angle to the light. She read. Then she set it down on the porch railing. "This is better than I remembered," she said. "What does it say?" "Your grandfather had the boundary resurveyed in 1798. The markers were registered with the State Land Commission, not just the county recorder. That means Talbot's entire claim is in the wrong jurisdiction." She looked at him. "Carter Hargrove is going to look very foolish when this gets to the assessor's office." "Good," Nathaniel said. "It also means you don't need to appear in person. The registered markers are self-evidencing." She tapped the page. "One letter to the State Commission citing this registration, and Talbot's claim collapses before it gets to a hearing." "Write it," he said. She looked at him. "Please," he added. "If you're willing." She looked at him for another moment, the measuring look, but different from how it had been in the early days, less guarded, more genuinely curious. "You trust me to write it correctly." "I trust you to write it better than anyone else would." She picked up the page. "I'll have it done by afternoon." She went back inside. He heard her tell the children they had 10 more minutes on their current exercise. He heard Polly Carney ask if Mr. Whitmore was staying, and heard Evelyn say she didn't know yet which was the most honest thing either of them had said about the situation to anyone. He went back to the fence line and worked until noon. The letter went by courier on Monday. By Wednesday, they had a reply from the State Commission confirming receipt and requesting Hargrove's representation provide counter-documentation within 30 days. Nathaniel showed the reply to Evelyn. She read it and said, "He won't find any. There isn't any." She handed it back. "That's done." "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." She turned to go inside. "Evelyn?" She stopped. He had been thinking about this for 3 days. About how to say it without it sounding like another speech, another arranged demonstration. He had decided the only way was directly without preparation. "I've been here 2 weeks," he said. "I've driven fence posts and cleared stones and eaten Reed's bread every morning, and I have not once asked you for anything except help with the land matter. I'm not telling you that, so you'll credit me for it. I'm telling you because I want you to know I understand the difference between being here and being useful." She turned back to look at him. "I'm useful here," he said. "Not because of who I am in the valley. Because of what I can do when I pay attention to what's needed instead of what I think I'm owed." He met her eyes. "I didn't know I could be that person. I didn't know because I never tried. I need you to know I understand that." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you for anything today," he said. "I just needed to say that." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Not resolution, not yet, but something turning in its direction. "You've changed how you hold yourself," she said finally. He blinked. "The way you carry yourself. It's different from 2 weeks ago." She looked at him directly. "Less like a man who owns a room. More like a man who's in one." She paused. "That's not nothing." She went inside. He stood on the porch and felt something he hadn't felt before. Not hope exactly, but the predecessor to it. The thing that happens when the ground shifts under you and you realize you are still standing. The crisis arrived the following Thursday in the form of a rider who came up the mountain road at a pace that meant trouble. Nathaniel was at Reed's property when he heard the horse. He heard it registered its speed and was moving toward the road before he had consciously decided to move some instinct from the estate. Years the automatic response of a man who knew that a fast horse rarely brought good news. The rider pulled up at Agnes's gate. A young man winded with the harried look of someone who had been given an urgent message and very clear instructions to deliver it fast. Nathaniel got to the gate just after Agnes came out of the house. "Message for Mr. Whitmore," the rider said. He looked at both of them. "That you, sir?" "It is." He handed over the letter. Nathaniel opened it. It was from his estate manager, a man named Calvert, who had been with the Whitmore property for 11 years, and who communicated in the terse factual manner of someone who had learned that his employer preferred information unadorned. The letter was 3 sentences. "Fire in the South Grain Barn Tuesday night. Cause unknown. 600 bushels lost and the structure is down." Nathaniel read it twice. He folded it. He looked up. Agnes was watching him with the careful attention of someone waiting to see which way a thing falls. Evelyn appeared in the doorway behind Agnes. He didn't know how much she'd heard. He held up the letter. She came forward and took it. She read it. Her face went very still. "Is anyone hurt?" she said. "Calvert doesn't say." "Then no one's hurt. He'd have said." She looked at the letter again. 600 bushels. She did the calculation. He could see her doing it, the rapid internal arithmetic of someone who had managed the estate's grain accounts for 2 years. "That's the winter reserves. You don't have secondary storage on the south property." "No. You'll need to purchase before October, or the workers won't have—" "I know." She looked at him. "You need to go back." He stood with the folded letter in his hand and felt the weight of it. Not just the grain, not just the barn, but the thing it meant. The mountain was ending. The weeks of fence posts and bread and cold mornings and honest conversations were ending, and what replaced them was the question he hadn't let himself fully face yet. "I need to go back," he said. She nodded. "I don't want to," he said. The words came out before he'd decided to say them. She looked at him, startled, he thought, by the directness of it. "I don't want to go back," he said, "and have this—" He stopped. "I don't want to go back to what it was. I need you to know that. Whatever happens after this, I am not going back to what it was." She was very still. "I know that's not your problem," he said. "I know you didn't ask me to come here, and you haven't asked me for anything, and I am not making this your responsibility. I needed to say it plainly, because I seem to have spent my entire life not saying things plainly, and I'm trying to be done with that." The rider had developed a very strong interest in the state of his horse's bridle. Agnes had gone back inside with the speed of a woman who has decided discretion is today's virtue. Evelyn looked at him in the mountain morning, and he looked back at her, and the space between them had over the past 3 weeks changed its quality entirely. It was no longer the distance of a breakfast table or the managed formality of a house where 2 people lived separate versions of the same life. It was the distance of 2 people who had been looking at each other honestly, perhaps for the first time, and were aware of what that meant. "Go take care of your estate," she said. "Evelyn, Nathaniel." Her voice was even, clear, the voice of a woman who has made a decision. "Go take care of the estate. Deal with the barn. Make sure your workers are provided for." She held his gaze. "And then we'll talk." He held very still. "We'll talk." "Yes." She looked at him directly. Not letters, not messages. Come back and we'll talk. About what comes next. About what this has been. She paused. About what it could be. He didn't breathe for a moment. I'm not promising you anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. You never promised me anything you didn't mean, he said. I know that now. Something moved across her face. Brief warmth, quickly composed. But there. Go, she said. And mind the third step on Reed's staircase when you collect your things. It's still loose. He looked at her for one more moment. He felt the particular sensation of a man who is holding something very carefully because he understands finally its actual value. I'll be back, he said. I know, she said. She went inside. He stood at the gate in the morning air and thought that those two words, I know, were the most significant thing she had said to him since he arrived. He packed in 20 minutes. Reed was at the barn and came out when he heard the horse being saddled. Heading back, Nathaniel said. Heard. Reed looked at him. Fire. South grain barn. I need to sort it. Reed nodded. He handed Nathaniel the water flask from the barn post, a habit, a practical gesture, the kind of thing that had become ordinary between them in 3 weeks. Nathaniel took it and felt unexpectedly something that was not comfortable to feel from a man he'd known less than a month. Thank you, he said. For the room. For the work. Reed looked at him. You did the work, he said. I just showed you where the fence was. Nathaniel tied the flask to his saddle. Reed. He paused. Look after her. I don't mean I know she doesn't need looking after. I mean... I know what you mean, Reed said. Same as I've been doing. He looked at Nathaniel steadily. She'll be fine. She was fine before you got here. I know. Just making sure you know, Reed said. She wasn't waiting. She was living. He turned and went back to the barn. Nathaniel rode south. The road off the mountain took 2 hours, and he spent most of it with Reed's words in his chest. She wasn't waiting. She was living. He had needed to be told that. He had needed to be told that the woman he was trying to return to was not a woman who had paused in his absence. She was a woman who had built something, gathered something, become more fully herself in the months away from him than she had been in 2 years beside him. He needed to be worth joining that, not claiming it, joining it. He understood the difference now. He understood it the way you understand something that has moved from your head into your body, not as an idea, but as a condition. He reached the valley by evening. The estate looked the same and entirely different, which was the way things looked when you had been away long enough to stop seeing them through habit. He tied his horse at the post and walked to the south field first before he went inside because Calvert's letter had said the structure was down and he needed to see it for himself. The barn was gone. The stone foundation remained, and the scorched earth around it showed the shape of what had stood there, the massive South grain barn that had been built by his grandfather, and that had been in his mental map of the estate simply permanent, the kind of thing that would always be there. He stood at the edge of the foundation and looked at it. He had lost 600 bushels and a building. He would spend money he'd planned to spend elsewhere. The winter provisions would require renegotiation with 3 different suppliers. It was a significant problem, and he would solve it, and the estate would continue. He had been afraid of this moment on the road, afraid of what it would demand. But standing at the edge of the ruined foundation, he felt something unexpected, which was clarity. The barn was gone. He would build another one. The grain was gone. He would purchase more. These were solvable problems. He knew how to solve them. He also knew now how to tell the difference between a problem and a loss. He had come very close to the second kind. He went inside. Calvert was in the study. He had the accounts open and the look of a man who has been managing a crisis competently and is relieved to have someone to hand it to. Mr. Whitmore, he said. Tell me everything, Nathaniel said. Calvert told him everything. The fire started Tuesday night, probable cause an overturned lamp in the East Bay. One of the field hands had gone in after supper to check on some equipment and hadn't properly secured the light. No one was hurt. The hand in question, a young man named Curtis, who'd been with them 2 seasons, was staying in the workers' quarters in a state of considerable distress. Get Curtis, Nathaniel said. Calvert went. He came back with Curtis, who was 19 years old and had the appearance of someone who had not slept in 3 days and was expecting to be dismissed at minimum, prosecuted at maximum. He stood in the doorway of the study with his hat in his hands and didn't look up. Nathaniel looked at him for a moment. He thought about what Evelyn had said in the mountain kitchen about the field workers' dispute she had resolved in the first year of their marriage. He thought about what that required, the ability to look at a person and see the situation, rather than just the outcome. "Sit down, Curtis," he said. The young man looked up. He sat carefully. "Tell me what happened," Nathaniel said. "All of it. Don't leave anything out," Curtis told him. His voice shook twice. He didn't apologize, he seemed beyond apologies, which was itself a kind of honesty. He described the lamp the hay bale had overturned into the speed with which it had spread before he got the other workers up. He described trying to get the grain out and being beaten back by the heat. Nathaniel listened. "You'll replace the lamp cost out of your wages," Nathaniel said when he finished. "That's fair, and I believe you know it." "Yes, sir. The barn is a structural loss. That's not in your wages." Curtis blinked. "You've been a reliable hand for 2 seasons, Nathaniel said. What happened was careless but not malicious. I'm not dismissing you for a mistake. I need you to be more careful. Can you do that?" The young man stared at him as though he was not entirely certain this was the same person he'd been working for. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." "Go back to work." Curtis went. Calvert watched him go, and then looked at Nathaniel with an expression that Nathaniel couldn't immediately categorize. "Something," Nathaniel said. "No, sir," Calvert said. "Just Mrs. Whitmore handled the last situation that way. With young Danny Pierce the summer before last. The fence gate he broke." Nathaniel looked at him. "She kept him on," Calvert said. "Said a scared man who knows he made a mistake works harder than a resentful one." He paused. She was right. Nathaniel sat back in the chair behind his desk. His own desk, his own study. The room he'd sat in for years, feeling perfectly in possession of everything around him, and looked at Calvert. "What else did she do," he said, "that I didn't know about?" Calvert looked at him. "Tell me," Nathaniel said. "Specifically." Calvert told him. He sat across from his employer in the study and told him specifically for 40 minutes. The field worker dispute, the grain contract billing error, the household accounts, the correspondence with the Caldwells and the Hargroves, the time she had ridden out to the east property in the rain because one of the older workers had taken sick and no one had thought to tell anyone who might help, and she had organized the man's care and his family's provisions for 6 weeks without mentioning it to anyone. Nathaniel sat and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not qualify. He listened the way he had learned in 3 weeks on a mountain, to listen with full attention and without preparing his response while the other person was still speaking. When Calvert finished, the room was quiet. "I didn't know any of that," Nathaniel said. "No, sir," Calvert said carefully. "You were—" He stopped. "Go on." "You were often occupied with other matters," Calvert said with the diplomatic precision of a man who has chosen his words very thoughtfully. "I wasn't paying attention," Nathaniel said. Calvert said nothing. He didn't need to. Nathaniel stood. He walked to the window. He looked out at the estate, the fields, the workers' quarters, the space where the south barn used to be. He had always seen it as his property, his management, his responsibility to maintain and grow. He had never seen it as a place full of people whose lives intersected with his in ways he had not bothered to track. Evelyn had tracked them. She had tracked all of them quietly without credit for 2 years. "I'm going to need a list," he said. Calvert looked at him. "Every person on this property," Nathaniel said. "Their name, how long they've been here, what they do, and what I should know about them." He turned from the window. "I should have had that list 2 years ago. I'm having it now." Calvert blinked. "Yes, sir," he said. He paused. "Mrs. Whitmore had one. She kept it in the green folder," Nathaniel said. "That's right." "Get me the folder." He spent 3 days on the estate. He met with the grain suppliers and renegotiated the winter provisions. He drew up plans for the new barn with a local builder who turned out to have detailed opinions about the original structure's ventilation problem, which had apparently been known for years and mentioned to no one. He read Evelyn's list of every worker on the property, their names, their history, the small individual facts she had gathered and retained because she believed that people who worked for you were people, not functions. He had not believed that before. He believed it now. On the second evening, Margaret came to the study. She sat across from him the way she always had, but something in her posture was different, less certain of its own authority, more considered. "How long are you going back?" she said. "Soon," he said. "She said she'll talk." He looked at his mother. "I went back up the next morning after I came home," Margaret said. "I wanted to see Agnes Whitfield. We have some things in common, Agnes and I, both widowed, both managing property alone." She looked at her hands. "Agnes told me she said she'd talk when you came back." He sat with that. "Mother, why did you go back?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. The quiet of someone deciding something. "Because I said what I went to say and I wasn't certain I'd said it correctly," she said. "I wanted to see her face when she thought about it afterward, to see if it had meant anything." "Did it?" "She wasn't angry," Margaret said. "I expected anger. She has more grace than I deserved." She looked at him. "I owe a great deal of that situation to my own behavior. I know that." "Yes," he said, not unkindly. If she comes back, I'd like to do it differently." She said it the way Margaret Whitmore said most things, as a statement, not a request. But underneath the statement was something unfamiliar, something that Nathaniel recognized slowly as vulnerability. His mother had not been vulnerable in front of him since he was a small child. "I'm telling you because you should know that the house is different, not just because she managed it well, because I managed it badly, in ways I didn't see." He looked at her. This woman who had raised him to believe that marriage was arrangement, that women were to be managed, that the proper expression of feeling was its successful suppression. She had not done it maliciously. He understood that now. She had taught him what she knew. It had been insufficient teaching. "I know, Mother," he said. She nodded. She stood. "Don't wait too long," she said. "She said she'd talk when you came back. Go back." She left. He rode north on the fourth morning. He pushed the horse harder than he had on the first trip up, not from anxiety, but from the particular momentum of a man who knows where he is going and why. He arrived at Agnes Whitfield's property at midday. Agnes opened the door before he got to the gate. She looked at him. She looked at the horse. She looked at him again. "That was fast," she said. "3 days," he said. "I handled what needed handling." Agnes tilted her head slightly, a small acknowledgement. "She's at the creek," she said, "working on something for the Beale family. Go on." He went. Evelyn was sitting on a flat stone above the creek, with papers on her knee and her shoes off, which was the most informal he had ever seen her, and which meant something about what the mountain had given her that the valley never had. She heard him coming. She looked up. She looked at him for a moment, taking him in the way she took everything in. 3 days, she said. "The grain situation needed immediate attention. I handled it." He sat down on the ground near the stone. Not above her, not beside her, near her, which was its own statement. "Curtis kept his job. I made a list of every worker on the property. The barn plans are drawn up. The grain is sourced." He paused. "I also spoke with Calvert for 40 minutes about everything you did that I didn't know about." She was quiet. "He told me about the sick worker," he said. "The east property, the rain." She looked at the papers on her knee. "Why didn't you tell me about that?" he said. "You didn't ask." "I know. I'm asking now. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him. "Because by the time I understood that you weren't going to ask, I had also understood that telling you without being asked would feel like requesting credit for something I'd done because it needed doing. And I don't do things to receive credit." He held that, turned it over. "That shouldn't have been the choice you had to make," he said. "No," she agreed. It shouldn't. It won't be again. She looked at him directly. How do I know that? You don't, he said. Not yet. That's going to take time. I understand that. He met her eyes. I'm asking for the time. The creek moved beside them. A bird said something in the sycamore above. The mountain afternoon had the quality it always had, the particular unpurchasable clarity of a place that had no concern for human arrangements and all the patience in the world for human growth. Tell me something you learned, she said. About what? About yourself, since you've been here. He thought about this seriously because she deserved a serious answer. I learned that I've spent my entire life measuring things by what I could see, he said. Land, money, social standing. Things with visible edges. I thought that made me a practical man. He paused. It made me a man who couldn't see most of what mattered, because most of what matters doesn't have visible edges. He looked at her. You don't have visible edges, Evelyn. You're the things you are don't show on the surface. I looked at the surface and drew conclusions and called it assessment. He stopped. It was ignorance. I'm telling you that plainly. She looked at him for a long time. Something in her face was changing. Carefully, incrementally, the way something changes when it has been holding a position for a long time and is finally not surrendering it, but reconsidering whether the position still needs holding. You came back, she said. I said I would. You came back in 3 days. She looked at the papers on her knee. You could have taken 2 weeks. You could have used the barn as a reason to stay. No one would have blamed you. I didn't want 2 weeks, he said. I wanted to be here, talking to you. She was quiet. Evelyn. He waited until she looked at him. I'm not asking you to go back to what we had. I know that's gone. I'm asking you if we can build something that isn't what we had. He paused. Something that's actually what we should have had from the beginning. The creek moved. She looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she set the papers aside. I have conditions, she said. He held very still. Tell me. I manage the estate accounts, she said. Formally, not in the background, not because you've decided to allow it, as a recognized part of how this household functions. Yes. Your mother and I reach our own understanding. You don't mediate it. You don't intervene in our behalf. You let us find our own ground. Yes. I keep teaching, she said. Whatever arrangement we make about where I am, I keep teaching. These children need it, and I'm good at it, and it's mine. Yes, he said, without question. She looked at him. You said that too easily. I said it easily because it's true, he said. Watching you teach from that doorway at the schoolhouse the first day was the first moment I fully understood what I'd been looking at wrong. He held her gaze. You're extraordinary at it. It would be a specific cruelty to ask you to stop, and I'm trying to be done with cruelty. Something happened in her face. It was not the small flicker he had been cataloging. It was larger than that. Something moving through her expression that had been waiting for permission. She looked at him. He looked back. I have one more condition, she said. Her voice had changed slightly, still steady, but with something underneath it that was not steadiness. I need you to understand that I am not coming back to be managed. I'm coming back as a person who has opinions and makes decisions and occupies rooms fully, not the curtsy version, not the quiet version. She paused. Me. The actual version. He looked at her. The one, he said quietly, that I should have seen from the first morning. She breathed. He breathed. All right, she said. 2 words. Simple as a folded letter. Simple as a curtsy. Simple as a woman setting down a coffee cup in a breakfast room and deciding finally the terms on which she was willing to rise. He reached out and she gave him her hand. Not the formal way, not the managed way, but the actual way, her fingers coming into his in the mountain afternoon beside the creek, and the grip of it was the most honest thing that had passed between them in 3 years. Thomas Reed was coming down the north path. He saw them and stopped. He looked at them at the distance closed between them at the papers set aside at the hands. He read the situation with the accuracy of a man who doesn't miss much. He turned and went back the way he came. Because some things in their proper moment didn't need a witness. They just needed the people in them to finally be present for each other. And in the mountain afternoon, for the first time, they were. They stayed at the mountain one more week. Not because the estate required it. Not because there was unfinished business with the fence, or the legal letter, or the Beale family papers. They stayed because Evelyn said she wanted 1 week to finish what she had started, and Nathaniel said yes without deliberation, which was itself different from every decision he had made in the previous 3 years. He spent that week differently than the 3 before it. He still worked with Reed in the mornings. The fence line was finished, so they moved to clearing a drainage channel on the north side of the property that had been backing up through 2 rainy seasons. He worked because the work was real, and because he had learned something about himself on this mountain that he did not want to lose the moment he returned to a place where people addressed him as Mr. Whitmore and moved out of his way in hallways. But in the afternoons he went to the schoolhouse. Not to watch from the door this time. Evelyn had told him the 3rd day without preamble that Polly Carney's older brother needed help with arithmetic and that she didn't have time to take him separately because she was already running 2 levels of reading simultaneously. She said it the way she said everything practical, not as a question, not as a test, simply as a fact that had a possible solution standing in front of her. He taught William Carney arithmetic for 4 afternoons. William was 11, suspicious of adults who hadn't earned his respect and considerably sharper than his initial sullenness suggested. By the 4th afternoon, he was doing long division without prompting and had decided apparently that Nathaniel was tolerable. "You teach different than Mrs. Whitmore," William said on the last afternoon. "How so?" Nathaniel said. "She explains things like you're going to figure it out," William said. "You explain things like you already know I won't." Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. "That's fair," he said. William looked at him with the frank assessment of an 11-year-old who had not yet learned to moderate his observations. "You're getting better at it," he said. Nathaniel almost laughed. "Thank you, William." "Don't thank me," William said, with the precise intonation of someone who had clearly heard this exchange before. "Take it as information and do something with it." He left. Nathaniel stayed at the schoolhouse table and thought about the fact that an 11-year-old boy had just given him better instruction than most men he'd known for decades. He told Evelyn about it that evening on the walk back to Agnes's house. She listened. Then she said, "He said that to me in the 2nd week, about how I was explaining fractions. Was he right?" "Completely," she said. "I adjusted." She glanced at him. "Did you?" "I'll try," he said. She nodded. "That's the right answer." They walked in the early evening, and the mountain air was the temperature it got in August just before dark. Not cool exactly, but less aggressive than the afternoon, and the sound of the creek followed them on the left side of the path. And it was ordinary in a way that Nathaniel had not expected ordinariness to feel. He had spent his whole life organizing against ordinariness, ensuring that every moment of his days had the structure of consequence and management. He had not known that ordinary could feel like not happiness, but the thing that underlies happiness, the ground it grows from. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn said. He looked at her. She had asked him that before early in their marriage, and he had always deflected, not because he had nothing to think, but because he had not known how to let someone into his thinking without feeling exposed in a way that made him defensive. "I'm thinking that I don't want to lose this," he said. "The way things are right now, between us." She was quiet. "I know we're going back," he said. "I know it'll be different there. I know there are 100 things waiting the barn. The workers, my mother, the county, all of it. I'm not asking to stay here forever." He paused. "I'm asking whether we can take this with us." She stopped walking. He stopped too. She looked at him in the last of the day's light. "What is this exactly?" she said. "Say it precisely. Don't give me a speech. You talk to me," he said. "And I listen, and I tell you what I'm thinking instead of performing what I think I'm supposed to be thinking. And you correct me when I'm wrong and I don't defend myself. I just adjust." He met her eyes. "That," I want to take that with us. She held his gaze. That's what a marriage is supposed to be, she said. I know, he said. I didn't know that before. I didn't. I know you didn't. She turned and started walking again. He walked beside her. We can take it with us, she said. But it requires both of us to keep choosing it. Every day. I understand. Do you? She glanced at him. Because the estate is going to pull you back into the habits. The county will expect you to behave a certain way. Your mother will improve, I believe her, but she'll have her moments. And there will be days when you look at me across the breakfast table and some old reflex tells you that you know what I'm worth. She looked at him directly. When that happens, I need you to catch it before I have to. Yes, he said. I will. That's the condition I forgot to say at the creek, she said. That's the real one. He held that. All right, he said. And if you see me losing it, the catching you tell me. Directly. Not in the way you used to tell me, which was silence and competence, and waiting for me to figure it out on my own. He looked at her. That's my condition. Don't manage around me. Tell me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's going to be harder for me than you think. I know. You've had a lot of practice managing around. Years of it, she said. I know. He held her gaze. It ends with me. I'm asking for that too. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, all right. And it was the same 2 words she had said at the creek, but with something fuller in them now. Something that had been agreed to before, but was only now fully understood. They got to Agnes's gate. Agnes was on the porch, which was either coincidence or the behavior of a woman who had been watching the road. She looked at them, the two of them, the distance between them, the quality of the air around them that had changed in the way air changes when something has shifted. She said nothing. She stood up and went inside and came back out with 3 cups of coffee and said, sit down then. They sat. And they drank coffee on Agnes Whitfield's porch in the mountain evening, and Agnes talked about the drainage channel and Reed's fence and a letter she'd received from a cousin in Ohio, and it was the most normal conversation Nathaniel had been part of in years. He didn't say a word that wasn't true. He didn't manage a single thing. He sat on a mountain porch and drank coffee with his wife and her cousin, and it was enough, and he knew it was enough, and that knowing was everything. They left on a Friday morning. Agnes walked them to the road with the no-ceremony manner of a woman who expresses affection through practical action rather than declaration. She had packed food for the road. She had checked Nathaniel's horse's shoe, which had been slightly loose, without being asked. She stood at the gate and looked at Evelyn with the particular look of 2 women who have known each other long enough to communicate in the spaces between words. You come back, Agnes said. I will, Evelyn said. I mean it, not just visits. Agnes looked at her steadily. The school needs Miss Harmon is good, but she's going to need support when the county comes around about the funding. You've already got the aldermans on your side. That letter you wrote to the board is still sitting on somebody's desk. I'll write another one, Evelyn said. You'll come back and write it in person, Agnes said. Harder to ignore a woman in the room than one on paper. Evelyn smiled. It was full this time, unguarded warm, the smile of a woman in the presence of someone who has never once required her to be smaller. Yes, ma'am, she said. Agnes looked at Nathaniel. You. He met her eyes. She's good at more things than you know, Agnes said. And she's going to keep discovering more. Your job is to stay surprised, not threatened. Surprised. She paused. Can you do that? I'm working on it, he said. That's the right answer, Agnes said. She turned and went back to her property without ceremony or looking back, because that was Agnes Whitfield, and she had said everything that needed saying. Thomas Reed was at the road. He hadn't been there when they left the property, and Nathaniel wasn't sure how he'd arrived ahead of them, but there he was standing at the junction where the mountain path met the south road with his hat in his hands and the unhurried look of a man who has decided to do something and has done it. He looked at Evelyn first. You take care of yourself down there. I will, she said. Thank you, Thomas. For everything. He nodded once. He looked at Nathaniel. You know what you're carrying, he said. Yes, Nathaniel said. Don't forget it when the valley starts looking familiar. I won't. Reed put his hat on. He stepped back from the road. Mind the ruts on the south descent, he said. It rained Tuesday, and the clay won't be set yet. Then he walked back up the mountain path and didn't look back either, because that was Thomas Reed. They rode south. The valley looked familiar and different simultaneously. The red clay roads, the tobacco fields, the wide Virginia sky pressing down with its particular summer weight, all of it the same, and all of it somehow seen through different eyes. Nathaniel had left this landscape a man who believed his sight was accurate. He was returning as a man who understood that his sight had been shaped entirely by what he'd been taught to value, and that the teaching had been insufficient. Evelyn rode beside him. She did not speak much on the first hour of the road. She was doing what she always did, taking things in processing, arriving at conclusions she would share when she was ready and not before. He had spent 2 years misreading that silence as absence. He understood now that it was presence of a particular kind, the kind that was all interior. He left her to it. After the second hour, she said, I want to write to Miss Harmon once a week. Of course. And I'd like to send books. There aren't enough books up there for the level the children are reaching. We have 300 volumes in the estate library that nobody reads, he said. Take what you want. She looked at him. You mean that? Every word. She looked at the road. Your mother is going to find that excessive. My mother, he said, is currently in the process of becoming a different person. I'm not going to interfere with that. He paused. She might surprise you. She already did, Evelyn said. Coming to the mountain was the last thing I expected from her. She has always been capable of the right thing, he said. She just needed to understand which thing was right. He paused. We all needed that. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, what will you tell people about why I left? About where you've been? He had thought about this on the road down. He had considered several versions. The managed version, the strategic version, the version that preserved maximum dignity for both of them in the social context of their county. The truth, he said. She looked at him sharply. I said something inexcusable, he said. I said it in front of witnesses. Half the county already knows the Hargroves were staying with us. Carter Hargrove filed a legal claim on behalf of a man he believed was dealing with a distracted landowner. He looked at her. There's nothing to protect here except the truth, and the truth is that I failed, and you left, and I went after you, and I had to learn some things, and we are coming back together, because we chose to. He paused. I think that's a better story than anything I could invent. She looked at him for a long moment. People will say I went back because I had nowhere else to go. Let them, he said. The people who know you will know that isn't true, and the people who don't know you will learn. She held that. You sound different, she said. I am different, he said. She looked at the road. I know, she said quietly. The estate came into view at mid-afternoon, the roofline first, then the drive, then the full spread of it in the summer afternoon. Nathaniel watched Evelyn look at it. He watched her take it in the way she took everything in the full cataloging attention, already assessing, already seeing what was there and what was needed. She sat straight in the saddle. She had always sat straight. He had always seen that as composure. He understood now that it was something else, not the straightness of a woman performing propriety, but the straightness of a woman who occupies her own space entirely and has never once, not even in the worst of it, lost that. The staff was at the front of the house, not arranged, not the formal line of greeting he sometimes returned to after travel. They had come out because they'd heard the horses and they were standing in the way people stand when they've been waiting for something that matters and aren't sure how it's going to arrive. Thomas the footman was there. Mrs. Adler, the cook. Curtis, the young hand from the grain fire, standing slightly apart, with the expression of someone who had decided to be present, even if he wasn't sure he deserved to be. Calvert at the back watching. They all looked at Evelyn first. Nathaniel noticed this. They all looked at Evelyn. Not at him, not at the estate's returning owner, at her. Thomas stepped forward. He had worked for this household since before either of them arrived, and he had the dignity of long service, the kind that is not servility, but actual loyalty, earned through years of being treated as a person. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Welcome home." She looked at him. Something moved through her face. The thing she always managed quickly, the full feeling that she gave herself very little time to have in public. She gave it a moment longer than she usually would have. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "It's good to be back." She looked at all of them, not over them, the way people look when they are performing acknowledgement. At them, each one. "Hello, Curtis," she said. The young man looked startled. Then he straightened. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "I heard about the barn," she said. "I'm glad you weren't hurt." His jaw tightened. He nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry about—" "Mr. Whitmore has handled it," she said. "It's done." She looked at him steadily. "Be careful with lamps." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Every day." She went inside. Nathaniel stayed at the front of the house for a moment looking at his staff. The people who had run this estate with Evelyn and without him, and now with both of them, returned. "Get back to work," he said, but he said it differently than he used to say it. Less like a dismissal, and more like an acknowledgement that they had things to do that mattered. The distinction was small. The staff felt it anyway. Calvert lingered. "The grain supplier confirmed Thursday," he said, "and the builder has the barn material scheduled for next week." "Good," Nathaniel said. "Tomorrow morning, I want to walk the south property with you. Full assessment. I want to understand everything." Calvert looked at him. "Everything, sir?" "Everything," Nathaniel said. "I've been operating at the surface of this estate for years. That's changing." Calvert looked at him for a moment with the expression he had begun to develop over the past 3 days, the expression of a man updating a long-held estimation. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'll have the records ready." The first real test of the new arrangement came sooner than either of them expected, and it came from the direction of the county. It was a social call, or what presented itself as one. The Caldwells arriving 4 days after Evelyn and Nathaniel's return, with the timing that was too precise to be coincidence, and the manner of people who have decided to observe something and are being polite about their intentions. James Caldwell was 60, wealthy, and had the quality of a man who believed that social information was a form of currency, and that gathering it was simply good financial practice. His wife Eleanor was more straightforward. She had a sharp mind and didn't always bother to conceal it, which Nathaniel had always respected about her, even when he found it inconvenient. They arrived at 10 in the morning and were shown to the front parlor, and Nathaniel went down to receive them, and Evelyn came with him. Not behind him, with him. Eleanor Caldwell's eyes went to Evelyn immediately. She had the particular attention of a woman who understands that the most important thing happening in any room is usually not the thing being presented as important. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "you look well." "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell," Evelyn said. "I am well. Very." The very was new. Nathaniel heard it a small emphasis, the evidence of a woman who has decided that understatement was a habit she was putting down. They sat. Pleasantries were exchanged, with the efficiency of people who have known each other long enough to conduct them quickly. Tea was brought. Mrs. Adler had arranged it without being asked, and the arrangement was perfect, and Evelyn caught Nathaniel's eye for a half-second, across the room, a small acknowledgement woman to man, of something specific and shared. James Caldwell settled back in his chair with the air of a man arriving at his actual purpose. "We were glad to hear you'd returned," he said, looking at Evelyn with the benign interest of a man who is not benign. "The county was concerned during your absence." "That's kind of people to notice," Evelyn said pleasantly. "There was some talk," Caldwell said, "as there tends to be, in a close community." "I'm sure," Evelyn said. "People were curious about the circumstances," he continued. "The suddenness of it." "James," Eleanor said. He ignored her. I only mention it because, well, there's always interest in the affairs of prominent families, and some of the interest has been, he paused, less than charitable. Nathaniel started to speak. Evelyn spoke first. Mr. Caldwell, she said with the precise warmth of a woman who has had considerable practice being pleasant in difficult rooms. I appreciate your concern, and I understand that people talk. They always do. She held his gaze. What I'd like you to know, and to feel free to share with anyone who asks, is that my husband said something wrong and he knew it, and he came after me to say so, and I found that worthy of consideration, and here we are. She paused. That's the complete story. There's nothing more interesting in it than that. Caldwell looked at her. A man making a mistake, and a woman deciding how to respond to it, she continued. I'm sure that's happened in most marriages in this county. We simply had ours somewhere other people could see it. She picked up her teacup. I hope that satisfies the curiosity. The parlor was quiet. Eleanor Caldwell was looking at Evelyn with an expression that had moved in the course of 60 seconds from careful observation to something that was considerably warmer. It does, Eleanor said before her husband could speak. Completely. She looked at Nathaniel. You have a remarkable wife, Mr. Whitmore. I know, Nathaniel said. I'm aware of it now in a way I should have been from the beginning. He said it directly, in front of the Caldwells. Not as a performance, as a statement plain and unqualified, the way he had been practicing saying things since a mountain morning when an old man had showed him what honest looked like. Caldwell looked between the two of them with the expression of a man who had come expecting to gather information and has found that the information available is not what he anticipated. Well, he said. Quite, Eleanor said. She looked at Evelyn. I'd like very much to call again, without my husband if you're amenable. I've been meaning to speak with someone about the county school funding situation for months, and I understand you may have some thoughts on it. Evelyn looked at her. I have considerable thoughts on it, she said. Come Thursday. Eleanor smiled. It was the full smile of a woman who has been waiting to find someone worth talking to and has just found her. James Caldwell accepted a second cup of tea, with the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered so cleanly that he isn't entirely sure when it happened. After they left, Nathaniel stood in the front hallway and looked at Evelyn. She was already moving toward the study. She had work, she always had work, but she paused when she felt him looking. What? She said. You said it was a complete story, he said. The thing you told Caldwell. It is, she said. You didn't say it was a finished story. She looked at him. Something moved in her face, the warm thing, the unguarded thing more available now than it had ever been. No, she said. It's not finished. Good, he said. She went to the study. He went to find Calvert for the South Property walk, and the house moved around them. Thomas in the hall, Mrs. Adler in the kitchen, Curtis out at the field, Calvert with his records, all of it continuing as it had always continued, as it would continue. But differently now. In the particular way that things are different when the people at the center of them have changed. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs. She had the look of a woman who had heard the Caldwell's carriage leaving and had been deciding whether to come down. She looked at Evelyn's retreating figure going toward the study. She looked at Nathaniel. She handled the Caldwells, she said. She did, Nathaniel said. James Caldwell has never been told something so clearly in his life. She came down the stairs. I was listening from the landing. I want you to know that so there's no misunderstanding about how I heard. All right, Nathaniel said. She's going to change things in this county, Margaret said. Not this year, but over time. She looked at him. That's not a criticism. I know, he said. I have been wrong about a great many things, Margaret said in the tone of someone who has been assembling this sentence for some time. I intend to be wrong about fewer things going forward. She paused. I would like to speak with her, when she has time. I'll tell her. Tell her I'd like her opinion on something, Margaret said, about how the South property should be managed going forward. I have some thoughts, but I want... She stopped. "I want to hear hers first." He looked at his mother. "She'll appreciate that," he said. "The order of it." "I reckon she will," Margaret said. It was the first time he had heard his mother use that word. He thought that the mountain had reached the valley in more ways than one. 6 weeks later, Eleanor Caldwell sat in the front parlor with Evelyn and 3 other women from the county, Mrs. Hargrove Sr., who had been at the breakfast table on the worst morning and who had come because she said she owed something to the situation. A woman named Mrs. Price, who ran a small dry goods operation in Alderman's and had the quick practical intelligence of someone who manages money carefully. And a younger woman barely 20 named Clara Webb, who had walked 4 miles to be there and would not say exactly why, but whose presence carried the weight of someone who has been waiting for this room to exist. They were discussing the county school funding petition. Evelyn had the draft on the table. She had rewritten it 3 times. It was as of its current form, 8 pages of specific documented argument addressed directly to the county board with supporting evidence from 4 other counties in Virginia that had implemented formal school funding and shown measurable outcomes. Eleanor read the final 2 pages aloud. She had a clear, carrying voice. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Mrs. Price said, "If we submit this together, all of us on the signature, they can't dismiss it as one woman's opinion." "That's right," Evelyn said. "I'll sign," Mrs. Hargrove said. She said it quickly, like something she'd been waiting to say. "I've been sitting on the edge of things in this county for 20 years, and I am tired of the edge." Clara Webb said, "Me too." She looked around the room like she was checking whether she was permitted to be there. The room looked back at her like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They signed. All 5 of them on a document that would go to the county board the following week. The kind of document that would not be ignored. Not because of who signed it, though, that mattered. Because of what it said, and how it said it, and the fact that it was right. Evelyn sent a copy to Agnes Whitfield with a letter that said, "Here it is. The board meets in October. I'll be there in person." Agnes wrote back 3 days later. Her letter said, "I'll have the room at the back ready. It gets the morning light." The response from the county board arrived on a Thursday morning in September. Nathaniel brought the letter to the study where Evelyn was working. He set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. "You open it," he said. "It's yours." She opened it. She read it. She set it down. "They've agreed to a hearing," she said. "October 15th, county seat." He looked at her face. At the thing moving through it, not triumph exactly, something quieter and more lasting than triumph. The expression of a woman who has done a thing correctly and is taking a moment to know it before moving to the next thing. "I told you," he said. "You didn't say anything," she said. "I thought it loudly," he said. She looked at him. The warm thing, the unguarded thing, she let it stay longer now. She had been practicing that, the staying. "Come with me," she said, "to the hearing." "Wild horses," he said. She almost laughed. He had been working toward that, the almost laugh, the full laugh, the laugh she gave Agnes on the mountain porch. He was going to get there. He was patient about it now, in a way he had never been patient about anything. "I need to write to Eleanor," she said. "Write to Eleanor," he said. "I'll tell Calvert we're going to Harlan in October. He'll need to manage the accounts while we're gone." "He's ready," Nathaniel said. "You trained him, and he's ready." She looked at him, one of those long, clear, direct looks. "You've been watching me," she said, "all this time. You've been paying attention." "I've been trying," he said. "You're getting better at it." "I'm going to keep getting better at it," he said. "That's not a promise. That's a fact." She held his gaze. Something moved through her expression that had no name. He knew the fullest version of the thing he had been cataloging since the mountain. The warmth and the clarity and the particular quality of a woman who has come fully finally into her own authority and is choosing from that position to let someone in. "Go tell Calvert," she said. He went. She picked up her pen. She began to write, and the house moved around her. Thomas in the hall, Margaret coming down the stairs with her own letter in her hand that she was taking to the post herself, for the first time. Curtis out at the rebuilt South Barn that was already standing stronger than the one it replaced the whole estate. Alive in the particular way it was alive now, which was differently than before, which was better than before, which was the way things become when the people at the center of them stop performing and start seeing. She wrote to Eleanor. She wrote to Agnes. She wrote a brief, precise note to Thomas Reed that said, "The hearing is October 15th. I will come through on the way. If the north pasture fence needs anything before then, leave it for me." She knew he wouldn't leave it. She knew he would have it done by the time she arrived. That was Thomas Reed. She sealed the letters. She looked at the room around her, her desk, her records, her accounts, her window, her house chosen again on her own terms fully and finally, and with complete understanding of what choosing it meant. She thought about the morning of the curtsy. The breakfast table and the coffee cup and the long mahogany table, and the word arrangement landing in the room like something dropped from a height. She thought about the stage to Harlan County, and the room with the morning light, and Polly Carney reading aloud, and Thomas Reed at the fence line saying a man gets very good at measuring things his own way. She thought about a woman who had walked out of a house with a single traveling case and found in the mountains something she had not known to look for. Not rescue, not redemption, not a man willing to change. Herself. Fully and without apology, herself. And she had brought that self back to this house and set it down at this desk and said, "This is who is here now. This is who is staying." She heard Nathaniel's voice in the hallway talking to Calvert, the specific cadence of a man working through logistics with another person as an equal, rather than issuing instructions from above. She heard the difference. She had been hearing it for 6 weeks. She picked up the letters. She stood. She walked to the door of her study, and she opened it, and she stepped into the hallway of her home. And she was not managing, and she was not performing, and she was not waiting for someone to tell her she was worthy of the space she occupied. She was simply there, fully, clearly, entirely present. A woman who had curtsied her way out of a life that was too small for her, and had built something larger in the mountains, and had come home to build something larger, still not because someone saved her, not because someone finally saw her value and named it, because she had seen it herself, and having seen it, she had made it permanent. And that was not a thing that could be taken back.